We will begin the share in a few moments. Stay tuned. We're in the Laws of Shabbos, chapter 15 today. Hello. Hello, YP. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
I got John and you.
Yeah, all good. Thank you.
Trying to my weekly struggle with the technology.
That's there on our screen.
Hello,
You see-
Rabbi. Hello, everybody else.
You see the text?
Yeah.
Hi all.
Now
Yeah.
we can see it.
Okay, good.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hello, Ken.
Hi guys. Hi. Yeah, I'm not in my usual position, so excuse the bad picture quality.
Okay, guys, I'll be back in a
The
moment.
mind boggles. The mind boggles.
Is it still cold in Cape Town, Ken?
Yes, and the last 24 hours has been very cool with quite a bit
Yeah.
of rain. But now I
Okay.
think we're starting to warm up. The next few days it's going to get quite a lot warmer. So looking
Yeah,
forward to that change.
we've had some very nice rain here, so that's nice.
That's good. Well, you need it at this time.
We do.
Sad situation with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs passing away.
Yeah, terrible shame, man.
Oh, very sad.
It seemed to happen quite quickly.
All right.
Or had he
Yeah,
been sick for a long time?
There's a memorial being run by the chief rabbi at 7 this evening.
Yeah, to this evening, correct, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll look out for that one.
So,
Very sad. And Rabbi, I wrote off.
Yes, I'm absolutely devastated by Rabbi Sachs's unexpected loss at this point. I didn't think it was so desperate. We were praying for him. He had bouts with cancer twice before in his life.
Yeah.
And he survived. 72 years old. Could have had so much more from him. Okay, guys, I'm going to start straight away because it is
For sure.
a very long chapter and a very difficult chapter. I don't know how you've been managing till now, the laws of Shabbos, which is a lifelong study. And yesterday, those of you who were on yesterday would have done the 4 domains of Shabbos. Did you go through that in detail?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Okay, so that was so there's Reshus HaRabim, a public domain, Reshus HaYochid, a private domain, then there's 2 domains in between, a Carmelis, which is sort of semi-public, and a Mokum Ptur, which is an exempt area. So just a little bit of an introduction. A Reshus HaRabim, a public domain, by biblical law, would require to be something where 600,000 people traversed in the course of a day. Because that was the number of people of the Jewish camp way back in the beginning when the laws of Shabbos were given, and they were told not to leave their area. So I remember when the very first Eruv was built in Johannesburg, which was the Glen Hazel Eruv. It included my shul, Sydenham Highlands North, and it went as far as from Sandringham to Louis Botha Avenue. Now, the reason they stopped at Louis Botha Avenue is because they were worried that Louis Botha Avenue might be a public domain and Reshut HaRabim by biblical law, because they assumed that if, I don't know how many thousands of taxis and Putco buses go down Louis Botha every day, and how many thousands of people are in each taxi. So they worked out quickly that there must be 600,000 people, Between 3 taxis, maybe you could get 600,000 people. So, but in fact, it turned out, so they stopped at Louis Botha. It turned out in the end that Louis Botha, with all the Putco buses and all the taxis, still does not have 600,000 people in the course of one day. How do you like that? How's that for some interesting statistic? So Louis Botha Avenue is not a biblical public domain, but maybe rabbinic. So we'll talk about that. So again, this is a long chapter and a difficult chapter. I cannot see us getting through in a half hour or so the whole thing. So forgive me if I may have to gloss over some paragraphs. I also have a funeral just now this afternoon, so I really can't spend more time than normal. Just again, one disclaimer that we have to make in the beginning is that in Johannesburg, those of you who are listening in Johannesburg, we do have an Eruv. And other communities also have an Eruv. Now, the Eruv is designed so that people could carry, transport, transfer from one domain to another, from private to public, and vice versa. Because in communities where there is no Eruv, and there are many still around the world, Jewish communities that do not have an Eruv. I grew up in a jam-packed Jewish community in Brooklyn, and there was no Eruv. And I can tell you that when we had our first child, my wife was pretty much a prisoner in the house all of Shabbos, unless we made pre-arrangements, because we lived in a block of flats, and we couldn't take the baby out for a walk in the pram. We couldn't go to our parents, and we didn't have domestic help like people have here. So in South Africa, it's not so difficult. I actually maintain that the Eruv was not so vital in South Africa as it is in other places. Because here, most people do have help, and they could go out, and the baby has built-in babysitter. But even here, it's been a great help to people, and you have many people going to shul with prams outside in the foyer of shuls. Pre-COVID, and please God, post-COVID, we'll see again dozens of prams parked in the foyers of shuls because people may, because there is an Eruv, they may push a pram or carry a child to shul on Shabbos and back. So that's a very important disclaimer. So this is written, all these laws of the Rambam are written in a place where there is no Eruv. There's no Eruv, so you may not transport or transfer anything from one domain to another. And that's why all of these laws apply. So we begin 1. Person standing in a public domain may move articles throughout a private domain. So let's say he's standing outside his house and the front door is open, or the window is open on the ground floor, and there isn't a massive wall around the house like we have in Johannesburg, so the house abuts on the street. So he's in the street, in the public domain, the window's open, so he can lean into the house through the window, and he can actually reach down onto the floor, and there are objects in the room where he's reaching into, and he can move things from one side of the room to the other as far as his arms can take him. So he's standing in a public domain, but the things that are in the private domain, they haven't gone anywhere, so there's no problem there. Conversely, a person standing in the private domain may move articles within the public domain, but there's a catch here. provided he does not transfer them beyond 4 cubits. How much is a cubit? Cubit is from fingertip to elbow. Are you watching me? Look on the screen. Fingertip to elbow is a cubit. But some people are 6'6" and some people are 2'8". So not everybody's cubit is the same. So the halachic decisors have different opinions as to how much is actually a cubit. It ranges between 1.5 feet to 2 feet. Now, if we translate that to metric system, let's call it 2 feet just to keep it simple. So 4 cubits would be 8 feet. Or if it's 1.5 feet, so it's 6 feet. So it's basically approximately 2 or just over 2 meters. Okay? So you may not transfer things within the public domain a distance of 2 meters or more. So not talking now about from private to public, but within the public domain, you may not move things from point A to point B if it's going to be more than 2 meters. Now, 2 meters is not a very big space. That's the space that we observe in social distance between us when we sit in shul or when we meet someplace. So 2 meters is not very far at all. So you have to be careful about that. I'll just tell you a cute story. When I was a kid, growing up in Brooklyn, I was walking one Shabbos morning. I was walking to shul down the street, going to the Rebbe Shul in 770 Eastern Parkway down Kingston Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And it's Shabbos morning, and lo and behold, the wind is blowing a $5 bill down on the pavement in my direction. Now this is, I'm talking maybe 60 years ago. You know what $5 was worth 60 years ago? It must be a couple of million rand. I don't know how much. So the first thing I did was I stepped on the $5 bill with my shoe. So now I stopped it. It's under my shoe. And now I'm thinking, what is the halacha? I'm about a 10-year-old kid. I've learned a little bit about the laws of Shabbos. I haven't done as much as you are doing here, going through the whole Rambam. So I knew a little bit. Now, a little knowledge can be dangerous, you know. But $5 for a kid is a lot of money. So I knew I couldn't pick it up and put it in my pocket. First of all, money is muktzah. It's forbidden to be handled on Shabbos. Second of all, there was no eruv, so I could not carry anything. So what do you do? $5, $5. So I thought I came up with a pretty good solution. I shuffled the bill with my shoe very slowly, a few inches at a time, until I was able to get it into the entrance of one of the shops. It was actually a barber shop, I remember. And they had a welcome mat in front of the shop, in front of the front door. And I managed to shuffle the $5 bill under the welcome mat in front of the barber shop, so it was out of sight. Lo and behold, when I came back after Shabbos on Saturday night, it was still there. And I had $5 in my pocket. So that was great. Now the question is, did I violate Shabbos? So here he says in Halacha 1 that you may not transfer something within a public domain beyond 4 cubits. Okay. Insight into it. So I'm sure it wasn't 100% kosher in the ideal sense, but let's put it this way: I had a little knowledge of 10 years old.
are you
Make
breaking?
the shop more meters. It was a few inches at a time. I would not liable. If
Rabbi, we can't hear you.
It hasn't started yet.
Rabbi, we can't hear you.
We can't hear him and we can't see him.
Yeah, he's disappeared.
He's disappeared. But he's still talking, it sounds like.
Sounds like he's far away.
I don't think he realizes that we can't hear him. Maybe we should send him a message. I don't know how to do that. One of you who's...
Yeah, on this group,
Is
you
an
can't send
alternative line.
Sorry, I have just sent him a message.
That's great. Okay.
Thanks.
There's nothing about communication when it breaks down.
There's no communication.
But there's nothing like communication when it breaks down.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
While we're waiting, I must just mention something funny that happened. Talking about communication. We had a communication meeting scheduled for last Friday morning at work, and they cancelled the meeting without notifying the people that were supposed to attend. And that's all about communication.
Oh my gosh.
Rabbi just said he's
Quite
reconnecting.
ironic.
That's ridiculous. I think he's giving the shiur to himself.
He just says he's reopening.
Oh, great. Okay, fine. Oh, shame. And he said it was a long one. He's got 10 more minutes almost.
Yeah, he's not going to get
And a
through.
very complicated one.
You have to cut the little stories a bit.
I think the is so complicated. I will have to say
Even you're also breaking up. We can't hear you.
Yeah.
can you hear me now?
No, not really.
Not too good.
Sounds like you're underwater.
I can hear everybody perfectly.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Oh, now I've gone off.
We can still hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you, Rabbi.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what. I have no idea what happened over there. But now we've lost the. We've lost the text. Right, we don't have
Everything's lost for
time for
me.
this. No.
Otherwise, Rabbi, just go without the text and we'll listen. We can open up the text for ourselves.
We can get the text on our phones or on our computers.
Yeah.
So you carry on, I think,
Let
Rabbi.
me just see if I can get it. Okay, in that case, we will do that. Okay, so I am. Okay, so I'm using the text that I have in front of me. Right, so, okay, the second paragraph in Halacha 1 speaks about an animal. In those days, they force-fed animals. I don't know if they still do that. If the head of the animal is inside the stall, but the major portion of the body is outside, you may feed the animal. You may not, however, force feed a camel unless its head and the major portion of its body is within the stall, since a camel's neck is unusually long. I guess the same would apply to a giraffe, but we don't usually feed giraffes, do we? Halacha 2. A person should not stand in a private domain and stick his head into the public domain to drink. Nor should he stand in a public domain and put his head into a private domain, say through the window of the house, to drink there, unless he brings his head and the majority of his body into the domain in which he is drinking. Because in a sense, you are transferring the water or whatever you're drinking, the beer, from the public to the private or private to the public domain. If most of your body is in one place and your mouth is in the other, you have effectively transferred this beverage from one domain to another. But if your head and most of your body are in one domain, then that's considered that you're as if you're totally in that domain, so you haven't transferred anything. We move on. Again, as I say, I'm going to have to skip some of the halachas because we don't have enough time to do everything. So let me go to number 3. A person may stand in a public domain, extend his hand, collect water that is flowing from a drain pipe or a wall while the water is in the air and drink it. I hope it's clean water. Which applies provided that he does not touch the drain pipe or the wall and collect the water from there. It has to be, he's collecting it as it drips down in the air. Okay, there's a whole lot of laws about projections extending from the wall, say a beam coming out of the wall near a window, depending how high it is. You may have learned yesterday that there's an exempt area which is over 10 hand breadths. Here's a hand breadth, 10 fists from the wall, over 10 hand breadths. It's in a different area. It's not the public domain. It's called an exempt area, which makes life easier sometimes. Okay, I'm going to move to number 8, halacha 8. The following rules apply when there are two houses on opposite sides of the public domain. So there's a street, there's a house here, a house there. In between, there's a street going between the two houses. So if the street is a big place, it's a public domain, the person throws something from one house across the road to the other. So it's not so massive, and he's able to throw it. Let's say he's on a balcony, and his friend is on the other house in the other balcony, and he throws him something across a public domain. So he says, if it remained 10 handbreadths above the ground, he will not be liable. He shouldn't do it in the first instance, but if he did it, he won't be liable. Provided both houses belong to him, or there's an eruv between them. One may throw even garments or metal utensils. If one of the two houses was higher than the other, not on the same level, then it's forbidden. You may, however, throw earthenware utensils and the like, because even if they fall, they'll break. So we're not worried. The worry here is if something falls, the guy's going to go down and collect it, and then he's going to be transferring from a public domain to a private domain. So we're trying to avoid that. But if it's something that's going to be breakable, it falls, there's going to be no point in getting it because it's broken. Similarly, halacha number 9, if a cistern, a pit of water located in the public domain has an opening to a home above it, then the cistern and the sand piled around it are measured together to see if their height reaches 10 handbreadths. If it does, one may draw water from it on Shabbos, provided the cistern is within 4 handbreadths of the wall, that enough room for a person to pass between them. So 4 handbreadths. So hopefully a person can pass through something this size. Look at my hands for a minute if you can see me. And depending obviously on the size of the person, unless they're too obese, God forbid. We're talking about the average person. If it's further removed, then you may not draw it. Number 10, it's permitted to pour water from a window of a home onto a garbage heap below in the public domain if it's 10 handbreadths high above the ground. If it's a communal garbage heap, which is unlikely to be removed, but if it's a private individual's, he might have taken it away, and then you'll be pouring into public domain, which will be prohibited. Then number 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 speaks about if there's a water conduit, like a sprite or a, what do they call it? A water
Canal.
A canal of some kind, yeah. But obviously not something very big. It's not a river. So if it passes through a courtyard, if it's 10 handbreadths high and between 4 and 10 cubits wide, you may not draw water from it on Shabbos because it's big enough to constitute a domain on its own. So then you're taking from one domain to another. So it would be called a carmelis. That's like the public domain, but not quite. And by the way, as I told you in the beginning, that Louis Botha Avenue is not a public domain by biblical law, then all the streets around our houses in our suburbs, maybe the M1, I haven't had a count on how many people traverse the M1 on one day. It's very likely that the M1 might be a highway might be a public domain by biblical law, which has more, there's maybe 6 lanes. Louis Botha has 4 lanes, 6 or 8 lanes at high speed. So it could be that those are public domains by biblical law. But in our areas where we live in the suburbs, it's mainly what we call a carmelis, which is like a public domain, but it's not quite the public domain, which makes actually the halachic details more lenient. But you should not bring things from a carmelis to a private domain. So therefore, this water canal, the sprite, is if it's big enough, and he gave the dimensions before, then it's a problem. Let's try and skip a bit because we're running out of time. Let's move to 15. Halacha 15. A balcony that extends over a body of water with an aperture in its floor that opens to the water. You may not draw water from it on the Shabbos unless a partition 10 handbreadths high is constructed over the water parallel to the opening of the balcony. Okay, I don't really see this as practical, but I must say I was once at somebody's home in Bantry Bay many years ago. It was stunning. And the house actually was built over the sea. So it was up on the sea, and the building actually protruded over the sea. So you could hear and see the sea, the waves lapping up under the house. You know, you could have a balcony literally over the sea, and you might be tempted to draw water or to go fishing maybe. So you can't go fishing on Shabbos either for these reasons. Look at number 16. We must not pour water into a courtyard that is less than 4 cubits by 4 cubits on Shabbos, because the water will flow into the public domain rapidly. If it's a very small courtyard, you're going to pour water, it's going to quickly flow into the public domain. You know, I walk to shul from my house in Oakland to Sydenham Shul on Shabbos. I go up Cheltendale Road. On Cheltendale Road and Louis Botha Avenue is a Caltex garage. And every Shabbos morning, there is a stream of water coming down Cheltendale Road, which goes downhill from Louis Botha. Why? Because the attendants, the garage attendants on Louis Botha Avenue are watering the paving of the garage of the petrol station, which I think is a waste of water. I doubt they have a borehole, but that's besides the point. And there's a stream of water coming down, blocks and blocks coming down Cheltendale Road. So if your courtyard where you're pouring the water is not that big, it's going to eventually flow into the public domain. So you have transferred this water from the private to the public domain, which is problematic. Let's move on. Okay, I'm going to move to number 21. Sorry, but we're running out of time. 21. Here's an interesting one. In those days, they didn't have printed books yet. So what did they have? Who knows? When was the first book printed? What century?
15th century.
15th century.
Yeah. Gutenberg.
The first printing press, the Gutenberg press,
That's right.
15th century. Okay. So the Rambam lived 800 years ago. So that's before there was a printed book. So how did the Rambam read books? They were not books, they were scrolls. They were parchment scrolls or paper scrolls, handwritten usually. So to write a book was a major effort. And the Rambam wrote his books by hand. Major effort. He didn't have a computer, didn't have a word processor. He didn't have spell check. Can you imagine? Now, so if people were reading a book before the printer was invented, what were they reading? They were reading a scroll. Think of the Megillah on Purim. Okay, the Megillah is a parchment rolled up. It's a scroll, and you have to fold it like 3 times to get through the whole thing. A Sefer Torah is a scroll, and that is the whole 5 books of Moses, so that's much thicker. But the Megillah is just a short story, the short story of Purim, which has, I don't know, a dozen chapters or whatever. So let's say you're reading the scroll, okay? So look at 21. You're reading a scroll in a Carmelite, a scroll of sacred writings in a Carmelite. So it's outside your house in the street. Now a portion of the scroll rolled into the public domain, into another domain from where you are. And the portion is in your hand. So it fell off your hand, fell out of your hand. You're holding the one side of the scroll. The rest of it you had folded, and then it fell. So it unfolded and it's rolled down into the next domain, into the street. So yeah, you're still holding the page that you're reading, but it's a long scroll. Maybe it's a Torah scroll of many meters, and it's rolled into the public domain. You're not allowed to roll it back into your domain because you'll be transferring from one domain to another. So what do? It's a sacred scroll. You can't just leave it like that. It's disrespectful. So he says you should turn it face down and leave it. This is a decree, a rabbinic decree, enacted lest the scroll drop from his hand completely, and he'll carry it more than 4 cubits. If it rolled less than 4 cubits, say approximately 2 meters or so, then he should roll it back towards himself. If he is reading in a private domain and the scroll rolled into a public domain, if it stopped, he should turn the scroll face down. If it didn't stop, but it's suspended in the air above the public domain and didn't reach the ground, then he may roll it back to himself. Maybe he was by a window and it rolled out. 22, a person who moves thorns so that the public at large will not be injured should adhere to the following guidelines on Shabbos. If the thorns were in the public domain, he should move them less than 4 cubits at a time, like me with the $5 bill that I told you the story earlier. If they were located in a carmelit, which is rabbinically prohibited, he may move them even 100 cubits, meaning there's no limit. In an ordinary manner, why? Because they're a danger to the public. And because it was a rabbinic precaution in the face of a danger to the public, he's allowed to move it. Similarly, if a person dies on Shabbos, okay? If a person dies on Shabbos, God forbid, Rabbi Sachs passed away on Shabbos. If a corpse began to decompose and is giving off foul odors, and it becomes abhorrent to the extent that the neighbors cannot bear to remain in the same place, then you may move the corpse from a private domain to a carmelis. But normally, a corpse is muktzah and should not be handled on Shabbos. Now, here in Johannesburg, most people don't know the laws of Shabbos, unfortunately, and most people can't handle a dead body in their house. So they call the Chevra Kadisha on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, even though they should not. Ideally, you should not call the Chevra Kadisha on Shabbos or Yom Tov. You should cover the body, and you should just treat it with dignity and respect. And people should recite Tehillim in the room or outside the room where the body is. And only after Shabbos should you call the Chevra Kadisha to come. But the Chevra Kadisha is sensitive to the fact that most people are not necessarily observant of Shabbos and don't know this rule. And even many Shabbos observers cannot handle it, and they call. So there's a non-Jew who answers the phone. I think his name is Chris or Grace, and he will organize a non-Jew to come and pick up the body and take it to West Park Cemetery on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but it's not ideal. So here he says that if it's a problem, you could bring it from the private domain to a carmelist. And finally, he says, after a person has bathed in the sea, he should dry himself when he comes out, lest he carry the water that is on him more than 4 cubits in a carmelist. So if you carrying water that's on your body is also a problem. So now normally we don't go swimming on Shabbos and we don't go into the sea on Shabbos, but I don't know the circumstances. Maybe the guy fell in, or maybe somebody pushed him, or whatever. Or maybe it's a woman where there's no mikveh and she's going to the mikveh. So you have to be very, very careful to observe the laws of Shabbos and the laws of modesty. But I know people who don't have a mikveh in their community and they use the sea. It's very complicated, and you have to be very, very careful, both with the laws of Shabbos and the laws of modesty in general, even if it's not Shabbos. But if it's Shabbos, then coming out of the water, you're carrying water, so you have to dry yourself immediately. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. I'm sorry we didn't get through everything, but it's already overtime, so my apologies. And I'm gonna have to end the meeting as I have a funeral to go to shortly. So I wish you all well. Any last minute questions, comments?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Very
Rabbi.
welcome.
Very much,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi.
Very welcome.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
good day. Have a good week. God bless you all. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. I'm ending the
Thank
meeting.
Thank you.